Hello, everyone, and welcome to the LeanTossup Call of Duty League podcast. This is Major 3 now. We are now officially, we've definitely crossed the halfway point of the year now. We are heading towards the back half of the year, but we've got a good major for you this weekend. After this weekend, we're going to have a 2 week break, but as always, the major weeks are the best weekends in Call of Duty. I am joined, as always, by my co-host CDL Metrics. How are you doing today on this? I'm actually recording this early this week. How are you doing on this Monday night?
Yeah, I'm doing well. We got a lot of great COD this past weekend. A lot of underdogs just coming out and winning. A lot of what we expected to be close series actually becoming sweeps. So a pretty chaotic weekend that established the seeding for this major. But yeah, it was a whole lot of fun to watch. Unfortunately, my Minnesota Rocker finished their streak of losing, or I don't know, their streak is continuing, but yeah, they lost all five of their qualifiers. They've lost seven in a row at this point. Not looking good for them. Not a team we have to talk about that much as we dip into the futures market here, but yeah, looking forward to Major 3, and it'll actually be the last COD event with fans in attendance until Major 5. So a lot of online games, and then Major 4 will be on LAN but without fans. So that kind of, that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. So yeah, this will be a fun one. Optic is hosting. It'll be a sea of green, a green wall, if you will. Um, and yeah, last time Optic hosted a major, they won it. Could it happen again? Yeah, maybe. We'll see about that in the futures market. But I am pumped as always, and I hope you are too.
Yeah. So let's talk about the futures market here. So I'm just gonna read them off. I'm not gonna read off the to reach the final because generally they're about half-ish odds to the outright win. So outright phase plus 225 to win, ultra plus 350 to win, surge plus 400, subliners plus 550, optic plus 600, thieves plus 700, Boston plus 1,000 or 10 to 1, Gorillas 50 to 1. Wow, that really was a steep drop off there. Vegas 66 to 1, Rocker 66 to 1, Ravens 101 and Florida 150 to 1. So it's funny because earlier today, if you go on YouTube, um, one of the people, I can't remember whose it was. Yeah, Ben Nassim, one of the basically one of the analysts on the flank, he said that it's an 8-team toss-up to win Major 3. And to be fair, I somewhat agree with what he's saying, but at the same point in time, this is definitely not an 8-team toss-up. There's a very clear differentiation between there's several tiers of teams here, right? You've got your first tier, which is FaZe, which is the clear favorites to win. I mean, well, they're favorites. I wouldn't say necessarily clear. Clear implies like a clear differentiation, and there is somewhat of a differentiation, but not a lot between a plus 225 and a plus 350. That's not a lot. But that implies, though, that basically the books are saying FaZe would beat Ultra if they were to play head to head, right? Or rather, that if they played head to head and Ultra won one of them, FaZe would probably would be more likely to win the best of seven. Then you've got Ultra at plus 350. So further back, then you've got Seattle at plus 400. So that's basically implying that a game between Toronto and Seattle is a toss up, which I don't know. Maybe that's not necessarily accurate, I don't think, but we'd have to see. Then you've got Subliners at plus 550. Then you've got Optic at plus 600. Thieves at plus 700. And then that kind of rounds out the single digit ones, or the 3 digit ones, I would say. And then, because then you've got Boston at 10 to 1, which is, I think, the only last competitive one, because then you drop from 10 to 1 to 50 to 1, which is actually a pretty substantial drop off. Um, and then, because then you've got LAG, then you've got the other ones. And to be honest, of the other four, I think, well, okay, let's start there. Of the four, so LA, oh, actually, no, sorry, we'll make that five. Of the five, LAG, Legion, Rocker, Ravens, and Mutineers. If you had to bet, if you were forced to bet on one of those five teams, which one would you bet on?
Oh goodness. To win outright or I guess it
To
doesn't
win out,
matter.
yeah, to win outright, reach the
To
finals.
win the whole thing.
This doesn't have to be
It would
good, by
have to
the way.
be, yeah. Ay ay ay.
Well,
I
okay,
mean, it would have to be Gorillas, I guess. I mean, they're starting in winners bracket, and their odds are. basically the same as two of those losers bracket teams. Like it sounds like a big difference when you say 50-1 versus 66-1,
but
but
it's
in
not.
reality that percentage difference is not much. Like you're going to make bank either way depending on who wins. It's so yeah, it'd have to be LA Gorillas. I'm not confident in them because they have a tough first round match. Their second round match is going to be guaranteed harder in my opinion. Um and like yeah, it was impressive that they got into winners bracket. They were on the outside looking in going to last weekend, but you know, I would say they had a favorable schedule to do so. We talked about it last week that it wouldn't be out of the question for LA Gorillas to get in. They played Mutineers, they beat them. They played Legion, they beat them. Those were their only two wins during the qualifier stage. It felt like they maybe needed the Royal Ravens win last weekend to really give themselves a shot, but thankfully they won out on tiebreakers over Vegas and over Ravens. So good on them. But yeah, they'll have a tough time here. I know Ben said it's an 8-way toss up. I think it's safe to say 7. And I wouldn't use the word toss up like he did. I would say there's a realistic chance for 7 of these teams to win. Um, Better odds for a handful. But like, yeah, it's a deep field we have this year. We mentioned it at Major 2 that, it felt like we had a nice core of teams here and not all of the win probability was concentrated at the top like it was for so many events last year. So yeah, we'll see if FaZe can go back to back. We'll see if New York can get a second major under their belt. But if not, right, there's Toronto, Seattle, Thieves, Boston, Optic. Like all of those teams we've seen glimpses of greatness from this year. And yeah, any one of those teams could get hot and take this whole thing down. But yeah, I guess if you're if you're giving me a free bet, but I had to take it on one of those 5 bottom teams, I just default to LA Gorillas. But out of pure fandom, I would also maybe sprinkle a little on Rocker as well, just
Yeah,
because it's the right thing to do.
I'd almost like I'd make a case for London, honestly. Although LAG is starting winners bracket, and that isn't a hammer advantage. And actually, you can see because again, as you mentioned, there's not a huge difference between 50 to 66, but there is a huge difference between 10 to 50, right? Like there's a huge drop off between Boston and LAG, and then there's a smaller drop off between LAG and Las Vegas, right? So I think that extra, basically 1,600 basis points, the extra 1,600 in there. I think that's literally the difference between starting in the winners bracket and starting the losers bracket. I think that's very clear. Like I think LAG and Legion are very close teams, even though I think LAG did beat them 3-1, but it was a very close 3-1. So I think that's basically about the same. I think if you were to sprinkle one, I think you'd have to do London because I think it's like, oh, okay, here we go. Like they struggle randomly, but then they have moments where they look really good, and then they also just took down Toronto, right? Like now it doesn't necessarily mean they're good. They're still not a good team, but I'd say that they're probably a better team than we would have thought they were. Like had they not beaten Toronto. Right now, again. We are recording this on Monday. Normally, I'd start reviewing matches by now, and that is 1,000% a match I will review because I think it's basically wreaking havoc with the model in some cases. That match specifically. So I'm gonna watch that match specifically to figure out what happened in it. But I think London is the highest variance team, and I think that at 100-1, I mean, well, LAG probably isn't the worst bet to put on there. I think like you put a high variance London Royal Ravens team in there. I think the results could be like not horrible if that makes sense. So
Yeah, and like they'll play the loser of Boston versus Optic. Two teams that have question marks. Like of all the 8 teams in upper bracket, like I don't know, I'd be okay to play either of those in your first match. It's not like Rocker has to play FaZe or Thieves. That's going to be really really tough. Florida has to play Toronto or New York. That sounds really really tough. And I know, right, Boston 4-1 in the qualifiers with their new team. That's very impressive. At the same time, a lot of those wins were close. But some wins were against really good teams, right? They beat Toronto, they beat LA Thieves. Like they did what they had to do with this new roster. And then you throw Optic down against London, like I mean, you got the whole crowd behind Optic for that match on Friday, and just I can't imagine Optic going loss, bowing out of the tournament. But at the same time, it's an Optic team that's been, pretty high variance as well. You mentioned it with London. You're right. They've been kind of up and down throughout the year, mostly down, but they've shown signs of greatness, or goodness, I guess. Yeah, and Optic much the same way, right? Like they had to get a win versus FaZe, and they did. Like they didn't win super convincingly. It was a 3-1, but those first two maps, or at least map one, could have gone either way. Search went about how we thought it would, and then map 3 and 4, I mean, Optic showed up against one of the best teams in the game. So, um, yeah, it's hard to kind of pencil in where those two are specifically. And if we catch up on a bad weekend, yeah, I think London could scratch out a win maybe against one of those green teams. The question then just becomes with London, like, okay, can you keep it up? Can you go on to beat Toronto or New York or Florida, whoever you'd play in that match? And then, oh yeah, you got to win like four more after that. So it's 100 to 1. Obviously, it's very unlikely to happen, but I don't hate it. The rationale makes some sense, and yeah, their path is manageable for a losers bracket team. So I get it.
Yeah. Moving on now to those top 7. Now, I guess so. Actually, we'll go to your major model. I never have recoded it with the new updated model since last year. So, like, what do you, where do you have like what? I feel like this is misleading, right? Like, I mean, obviously, there is this general sense that it is unclear who will win this major, right? And the odds kind of pan that out. I mean, you can like squint a little bit and be like, well, plus 225 to like plus 700, it's not that big of a difference, and it's not really. But where do we like which of these, like the thing is, looking at these, and I'm may or may not bet any of the futures, I'm not sure yet, but looking at these 7, I feel like two of these at least are going to just turn out to be horrendous bets. Like it's going to be like these were literally the worst bets anybody has ever made, and we are going to there we on Friday night they're gonna be kicking themselves, be like, "That was so stupid. Why'd I bet $100 on subliners to win it all?" Like, do you get that sense? And is your model saying which ones though that is?
Yeah, the like outlier bad bets, I'd say number one in the to win outright is Seattle Surge at 4-1. Yeah, they went 4-1 this qualifier stage. Very impressive, especially for a team that doesn't do well on online matches, typically. But yeah, they went 4-1, took care of business, showed a ton of improvement in search and destroy. Like we can't really underestimate how good they've looked in that mode as of late after looking horrible. Through like the first 3 months, because they win, and they win big against quality opponents all of a sudden, and it's not just one map, it's a variety of maps. Like, yeah, let's look back. Seattle's last match was against New York. They played an Embassy Search. They won 6-2. Very impressive. The match before that, Seattle played London. Again, Embassy, a 6-1 victory. Like, it's hard to do much better than that. Before that, they played Florida, 6-2 on Hotel. Now, some of these opponents, right, London and Florida, not the best opponents, but still, you're winning very, very comfortably in a lot of these. The match before that, they did drop an S&D to Thieves, 6-4 on El Asilo. That's a quality opponent. It goes to around 10. It's something, right? You're not going to win all of them. And then the match before that was their opener. I think it was their opener against Minnesota. Yes, it was. And that was a 6-1 win on Hotel. Again, Minnesota, not the best team. Seattle, a relatively easy schedule throughout the qualifier stage, but they dominated in search and destroy for the most part, and that's what we were looking for. So my model is slow to adjust, and I don't think it's fully embraced the Seattle might be a league average search team quite yet, because if that's the case, they're really, really dangerous. At the same time, we don't know, right? They could revert back to their ways and be a woeful S&D team. Um, and it's just they have a very nice opening matchup. They have the best opening matchup you can have. playing LA Gorillas round one. It's not a guarantee they win. LA Gorillas have looked okay lately. And, Thursday rolls around. If there's any a time you want to be an underdog, like it would be Thursday. So yeah, LAG, second match of the day. Could they take out Seattle? It's possible. Unlikely, but it's possible. And then if you're Seattle, right, you got to play Las Vegas Legion in your losers bracket round one game the next day. A very, very good S&D team. That would be a really fascinating match to watch just strictly for S&D purposes. I would have a lot of confidence Seattle could take them out and respawn, but like Vegas are the best of the bunch in the lower bracket, in my opinion. And yeah, good job for Seattle, like getting the one seed, very impressive. 4-1 to win outright. It's a little steep considering even if you win versus LA Gorillas, you got to play FaZe or Thieves in round two. Like that's that's a spot where I'd have Seattle as an underdog probably either way. And then after that, I mean, yeah, then you just got to get hot and hope to stay hot throughout the rest of the weekend. So that one jumps off the page as just a no value. I think my numbers are a little low on Seattle as a whole, but even with that considering, I think 4-1 is still a little steep. Um, One that I'd say jumps out the page as a value is FaZe to repeat. It's plus 225 I'm seeing right now. And I've got it at a 45% chance they win. That's a little steep considering what they've done lately, right? They kind of slept walked through the qualifier stage. They went 3-2. They have wins over Florida, London, and Vegas. Okay, those are three teams that started in lower bracket. And their losses were to LA Thieves and to Optic. And both of those, I believe, were in a 3-1 fashion. Now, those 3-1 losses aren't good, right? You'd obviously like to beat one of those teams. I almost think people overreact to them because we've known FaZe are just not a good hardpoint team. They're average at best. So when they lose series, like there's a good chance they lose 3-1. Um, and yeah, that could happen again in this LA Thieves series, but I just think their S&D is still top notch. We saw it against Optic Texas. They played Elisilo game two. That was a match I was hyping up as we approached the weekend as like, okay, we're going to figure out who the best Elisilo S&D team is. And it was FaZe easily. They won 6-3 in that mode. Yeah, FaZe, they're still just kings of search and destroy. They just dominate that mode. If they can get a hard point, if they can, keep on their control, they should be fine. But yeah, it was a little lackadaisical, I guess, for them as they, went through these qualifier games. But I still have faith. They're still a wonderful team. Obviously, they won the last major. They look dominant. So yeah, plus 225. I know it's the, heaviest price you have to pay for any team, but just any time that FaZe number is like north of plus 200, it feels like a good time to buy into them. So that's one I'd advocate for. Another one would be Subliners. They get Toronto right away. They're on the opposite side as the bracket for FaZe, which is good. Um, they run into Toronto right away, who they did get swept by. However, that was a very close sweep, so it could go any which direction in that match. Then they get Boston versus Optic if they win that. Again, New York are a team we've seen win a major already this year. They're the fourth favorite on the board. I think, plus 550 is decent. I actually like them more just to make the final, which is plus 250. Just considering that their path to the final is quote unquote easy. Again, you're just avoiding FaZe as long as you can, and Thieves for that matter. Uh, so yeah, those are the two I kind of like right now: FaZe to win outright or Subliners just to reach the final. But there is also an MVP market I know we can talk about a little bit, but
Yeah.
I don't know, anything popping out for you, Robert?
So I actually do agree with you on FaZe. I think FaZe is. I think they're probably one of the best teams in the league. It's really hard to. It's weird to wake up and say I'm going to bet on this 3-2 team to win it all. But anytime you can get fit, like again, and I said this last major, and I didn't follow my own advice, but I said there's a number where you have to bet FaZe. And I think that plus 225, I think it's getting close to it. I think that's close to what that number is, where you just like, you're like, all right, well, got to bet FaZe. Ultra at plus 350 is very difficult. I said a couple days, I think I said it earlier on this podcast, earlier, last week, I think. I said, I think I said last week, I am waiting for Toronto Ultra odds to win the major comes out. And I was hoping for a little higher than this. Plus 350 just seems a little short to me. I don't know. I'd rather it be higher. But like at this price, you're probably getting Toronto plus 150 to beat FaZe in a head, like Toronto plus 100, plus 125 to beat FaZe in a head to head. I think they can, but the plus 350 just seems a little. It seems a little short. I I'd rather that be 4, 5, 6. If it was 5 or 6, I'd be betting on it. But the plus 350, it's giving me some pause there. Seattle, I do agree with you on Seattle. I think Seattle, although they had some good qualifiers, two of those 4 wins were against Florida and London. So not the greatest. Also didn't look the best against London. They could have definitely that could have gone to a game 5 and then whatever would happen in a game 5. So there are concerns that Seattle team. Also, you tout subliners. I don't really want to do that. It's weird to me because I just don't see like I think this team was good, but the model's been saying to fade them, and I think that's fair. I'm not I'm not against that, and it's been working pretty well. I mean, they beat Optic, which was a bit fluky because it was a 3-0 that could have gone the other way, and then they got crushed by Seattle, and like convincingly crushed by Seattle. So I don't I don't know what to do on that one. But then you have to look at Optic and Thieves and maybe even Boston, and you're just like, well, Thieves at any point could go on a run, but is that worth a 7-1? Right? Breach. They're 10-1. They could potentially go on a run. Less likely though, but they could. Right? Like these are the pieces that it's like
Yeah, one thing I will say if you're a little cautious on New York, and I completely get why you would be, right? Like since Major 2, they've really just kind of been like average at best. Yeah, they were 3-2 this qualifier stage, wins over Minnesota barely, Florida and Optic. Now, like that Optic win was convincing. It was a 3-0. I mean, it wasn't convincing, but it still is a 3-0 over an Optic team that's been improving. Take care of business against Mutineers. The Minnesota win is a little concerning considering now, right, what we know about how good Rocker are. You lose in a sweep to Toronto, that could have gone either way. Like that match was pretty close, if I'm remembering correctly. And then yeah, the last match of the qualifiers, they fall flat versus a Seattle team that just looked scary, to be honest. So you know, I get it with subliners. If you are cautious on them, one market that might make some sense is maybe Breach to reach the final. It's plus 450. I do have that as a 1% edge, so, it's not huge value, but it could make some sense. Um, they're on the same side of bracket as New York and Toronto. So, right, if they can get past Optic in round one, which will be tough, right? The Optic will have their whole home crowd behind them on Thursday, that third match of the day. It's gonna be crazy. Um, like if Breach can get past them, you can make a case that they are close enough to Subliners or Toronto where they could get past that team too. And at that point, okay, if you can somehow win your third match, likely against FaZe, Seattle, or Thieves, like there you go. You're in the final, and if you can't get in with that third game, you at least have a shot to make it through losers bracket because you're already so far ahead in that case. So that might be one to eyeball. I'm not sure if these odds will fluctuate as we get closer to the major, but if Boston's odds on that drop a little bit just because they're getting overlooked, I think that could be one that could be interesting if you're a little tentative on New York or on Toronto for that matter.
yeah, I agree with that too, but we'll have to see. The thing of it is again, odds are updated after Thursday's games, after Friday's games, right? And then after Saturday, right? So if Toronto were to lose to New York or whatever, then you have the option to buy it at Toronto like 10-1 or something, right? So or vice versa, right? If you like if Seattle loses or Thieves lose or whatever, like if Thieves lose to FaZe, Thieves to make the final, going on a losers bracket run, maybe not that bad, right? So now, all right, let's talk about tournament MVP super quick. So I'm just going to read off the top couple ones because the top couple ones are the most interesting. Celium of Atlanta FaZe 5-1. Sim from Atlanta FaZe 5-1 as well. Abizi 5-1. Pred 550-1. So plus 550. Scrap plus 550. Hydra plus 600. Kleenex plus 650. Sib plus 700. Shotzi plus 900. Envoy plus 14-1, Dashy 14-1, Hixie 16-1, Slasher 18-1, Octane 18-1, Draza 18-1, Kismet 18-1, Hook 18-1, Mac 18-1, Awakening 20-1, Kenny 22, Beans 22, etc. So it is interesting that the top three are all Atlanta FaZe players. That is a little interesting. Then next up is Pred, which is interesting because Seattle is 4-1 to win it, and then Pred is plus 550. So it's basically saying that like, assuming Seattle wins the title, there's like Pred is plus 150 to win, but like that's because Sib is the other one. But then you got Scrappy, which is basically the price of Ultra plus 200, which I kind of think he would be MVP if they were to win. So that's actually an attractive bet, to be honest with you. Hydra 6-1. That's basically the same price as New York winning it, which that would be their MVP anyway. Kleenex plus 650. He's been looking really good too. And then you got Sib 7-1, Shotzi 9-1, etc., etc., etc. Where do you fall on this? Where do you see it? What do you see as a good bet here in this market? Because it's a bit tricky to navigate, and you can't like blanket. Like if you blanket all of FaZe, you're going. You'd have like if you blanket the top three on FaZe, you're gonna have you're gonna neg money, right? It's negative EV. So where do you fall on these?
Um, yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I wouldn't take, as someone who likes phases odds this weekend, the MVP market is interesting, right? Because it feels like, okay, if you like phase, then presumably there's an MVP pick or two somewhere. And I would lean towards maybe just pairing Celium and Abizi together. I really don't think Slasher could win. I mean, he's had some maps where he's gone crazy, but just the role he plays for the team is just kind of like let those three do the work and just don't make mistakes. And it works for this team. They're fantastic because of that. I just over the course of a weekend for him to be the MVP of his team and win outright, that's a tall task. So Slasher at 18-1 is a no-go. Simp has already won a tournament MVP this year, so that leads me to believe they would want to give it to Celium, last year's season MVP, or Abizi, who I don't think has won anything since he won Champs MVP during the Cold War season. So I think maybe pair both of those up as opposed to just like taking the phase plus 225. I would maybe just take that and spread it amongst Celium and Abizi. Abizi just a demon in Search and Destroy. Both these guys just crazy good at everything. Celium's, overall like KD numbers at the end of the day will probably look better than Abizi's. So that could give him an edge should they win. But Abizi, like he's the reason this team is so good at Search and Destroy. His first blood numbers are amazing. The damage he puts in round by round, it seems every map, it doesn't matter. They play off of his first bloods and it works so often. So it depends on, kind of how they win. If they're just winning every Search and Destroy and it's because of Abizi, he'll probably get it. And if they improve their respawn enough where they're winning hard points consistently and control is going their way and Celium is dropping, 1.6s on teams, like then he gets it. So that's kind of where I would play that. Uh, Guys on other teams that could be interesting. You're right with Scrappy. Like if anybody on Toronto's going to win it, it's going to be him. I do have player rating metrics going on this year. I haven't updated it for yesterday's matches, but through, Saturday, Scrap was the number one rated player in the league. And it weights, how often you play hardpoint with Search, with Control. And he helps his team so much. The issue is I just don't love Toronto to win the entire tournament. Um, like for instance, if I just replace Toronto at plus 350 with plus 550 and assume that Scrap just wins it. Like he'll just win it because Hixie won't. And, Insight and Kleenex could, but again, it's probably going to go to Scrap if anything. Plus 550 for Toronto, even just to win the major, is still not great value in my opinion. So that one's a no go for me. Otherwise, I don't. It's tough, man. I think Pred and Sib are both a little too high. Um, Again, that just goes to Seattle's overall number to win the major. I think is being a little inflated with their recent performance. Any Thieves player is tough because it's a different guy every time for that team. So maybe you would, if you like Thieves, maybe you just drop down to the lowest guy. That would be Kenny at 22-1. I could totally see it. And I guess their prices are pretty spread out anyway. Envoy 14, Octane and Draza 18, and then Kenny at 22. So, you could make an argument for any of those guys. I would probably just want the cheapest of the bunch. A Boston player that might be interesting is Awakening. Again, a player who grades very highly in my rating system. He has for like since he's been in the CDL. This guy just puts up huge numbers. As someone who kind of thinks Boston will go on a nice run this weekend and doesn't think it's crazy for them just to win the whole thing, it would make sense that Awakening would be the MVP. But at the same time, right, we've seen highlight clips with Nero, like he can get hot at any moment. Beans is the new guy on the team. If he, gets close to Awakening or Nero, like you might just want to give it to the rookie who just came onto the team. Like that in and of itself is a thing people will talk about if Boston were to win this major. It's, well, who's new to the lineup? It's Beans. Give it to that guy. So it's tough. The MVP market's always tough. There's so many names to choose from. But I would just, yeah, my rundown is maybe pair a couple Atlanta FaZe players if you're like me and you like FaZe, specifically Celium and Abizi. Um, Otherwise, maybe a little sprinkle on Awakening if you're like me and you like Boston. Um, New York, again, a team that my model really likes. It's maybe a little too high on, but would make sense if it's Hydra. He's all the way up at 6-1, though. Again, a pretty steep price to pay. So yeah, I don't know. It's always tough. Do you have anything else? Any huge underdogs maybe like in the 30-1 or higher market that are interesting to you?
No, I
Fellow
don't.
at 500-1?
Yeah, I don't think so.
No.
God, poor Florida. It's so bad. I don't. I mean, there might be like
You
some
mean
mathematical
yeah,
edge,
or
but
yeah.
like, because like theoretically, like you could probably figure out who the best player in Florida is, and then just bet them instead of Florida to win the whole thing. But like, oh wow, that's you're like decimal points of value there. It's not what you want. So, but no, it's we're gonna have to see. All right, moving on to the matches for this week. So we've got four initial matches. Ultra versus Subliners. Ultra minus 1.5 plus 165. Subliners plus 1.5 minus 220. Ultra minus 135 on the money line. And then Subliners plus 105 over 4.5 plus 155. So weirdly enough, I actually have New York as like a 60% favorite in this game. Now,
Wow.
yeah, but I think I know why. So my model clearly has Toronto favored in hardpoint, but it has subliners favored in search and in control. And I suspect the reason for that is literally just because London. I feel like because the model does have a little bit of recency bias, especially when the difference is so stark, I think the model is way overreacting to Toronto losing to London. And I think it's tipped the scale way too far in the other direction. So while technically it's saying that ultra that subliners have a good chance of pulling the upset off here, I think I gotta lean Toronto here. I think Toronto is the better pick, but um, it is in fact debatable. You probably also do you have also subliners favorite in this match?
I do, ever so slightly. I'm surprised you have them all the way up to 60-40. I've got them at 52% favorite. This is about as much of a toss up as you can get. I'm really excited to watch it again. I'm kind of disappointed the first time these guys played. It was a sweep, albeit close. Like every map was very fun to watch. Um, but yeah, even still, I do make New York a slight favorite and a slight favorite in every game mode. 51% favorite in hardpoint. Again, that probably means they just split if it goes at least to a map four. Search and Destroy, New York a 52% favorite. Again, these are just the margins are so small with these teams. Control 51% favorite. You could flip those around and make an argument that Toronto should have those numbers, or maybe one team should be a little higher in any particular game mode. I will say, like, New Yorker plus money. That to me is, I think, enough to take them. Just because in my head, like, these teams are close. The numbers show that they're close. If you're going to give me one of these teams plus money, I think I'm just going to take it and be happy. So I get that Toronto had just, like, 2 weeks ago, they just beat New York in a 3-0. The 3-0 was close, and I think if you play the series 100 times, it's going to be close to a 50-50. So I lean New York here. I It's tough though. It's so tough because Toronto's another team I really, really like. The one argument I think you can give New York is just they've been the hottest team in the game at one point this year, and Toronto, they've looked good kind of throughout the year, but I don't know, they're almost like a Seattle in that sense where it's like they look so good. How could you pick against them one weekend and then the next weekend they lose to Ravens? And it's like, huh, okay. Um, let's see where they go from here. I mean, same thing, Major 2 for Toronto, right? They look great through one match and then lose to FaZe, lose to Thieves, and they're out. And they looked horrible that day. So it's always tough to say what you're getting with this Toronto team. I think New York are just a little more well-rounded. They've been together as a roster the entire year, whereas Toronto are, they're still playing with Hicksy. He's still new to the team. They've got some things to figure out. They've been good with him on the roster, no doubt. But yeah, I like knowing what I'm getting from New York, and I like that they're plus money. So that's where I lean. And I totally get if you like Toronto though, if you want to side with them, it's a tough it's a tough game, and I'm glad this one's kicking off the weekend because it should be a heck of a match.
Yeah, I agree with everything there. It's gonna be a great game. I'd say if you're betting some spreads, bet Toronto in the hard point, and then maybe New York in the control and thing. But this is gonna be a great kickoff match. I'm actually really excited for this 1:30. It's gonna be a really good match. Second game, Seattle versus LAG. Seattle is the spread is -2.5 plus 170. Jeez. Plus -2.5 plus 270. Well, plus 170. LAG plus 2.5 -225. Seattle -650 to win. LAG plus 360 over 3.5 -200. So it's a very this is an interesting matchup. The thing of it is, and this is what it comes down to. I mean, I think both of our models have Seattle favored here. I think that's very clear. But the question is how much. And
Yeah, not this much. Holy
no,
moly.
not that. Well, I have it smaller as well. Um, but like not that like I have a 3-1. I don't think I have a 3-0, but like I have a 33% chance of a 3-0, and that's about a plus 170. It was a 165 on Bet365. I didn't touch it, but like 170, that's close to what 33% is, right? It's a 33% chance of a 3-0. So that's not bad, if that makes any sense. Like Seattle's a much better hardpoint team, and like the spread's 45 in that. I think that's pretty fair play. Seattle's improving on search and destroy, and then they're also pretty good in control as well. So like I could see a 3-0 here. I really can see a 3-0. I don't know though. I don't know how good this Seattle team. Like the problem is like, do we trust the Seattle team to have like what would amount to be like 3 good weekends in a row? Now, to be fair, generally they are a bit better on land than they are online. But I don't know. What are your thoughts here? Like, I can't like the betting advice isn't LAG plus 2.5 -225. That's not happening. I'm not betting a -225. But like at the same point in time, what else? What do you bet here? Like maybe you could sprinkle a bit on the -2.5. Maybe you could sprinkle a couple on some spreads. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's tough. So yeah, that -650, plus 170 to win in the sweep, both a little too high for my taste. And right, we mentioned Seattle as not a great value in the futures market. It makes sense that we probably wouldn't like them in their opening match, considering that's the one match we know they're going to play. Um, but yeah, so as it stands, I have LA Gorillas as a 61% favorite in Search and Destroy games specifically. Now, right, we let's consider Seattle have been quite good as of late. Let's call Seattle a league average search team. And let's say LA Gorillas might as well be a league average search team. They're 500 on the year. Um, I want to say their, overall round count is sub 500, but they're a pretty, run of the mill search team. Let's call S&D a 50-50. Like, I don't know, that just kind of erases any value out of anything. Um, like over 3.5 maps, maybe, but that's -200. So unless you're throwing that in like a parlay, it's not a ton of fun. Um, yeah, I mean that I don't know, always or often like advocate for an over map count, and especially one with a price that high at -200. But like, I don't know, rooting for this game not to be horribly fast, that I could talk myself into doing something like that. I just yeah, the Seattle's just so dangerous and hardpoint and control that yeah, a 3-1 feels very very likely. A 3-0, right, if their search stays hot, also very likely. LA Gorillas are they're gonna have to show some magic, right? Maybe they learned something from their 2 wins this past weekend. Again, this is a good spot to take them out in. I think they'd probably prefer just the first match of the day to go on and take Seattle. But if you're LA Gorillas, right, you're saying, okay, we got the 8th seed, we're playing Surge. That's a winnable game. Like they they have confidence coming off of 2 straight wins. Um, Knowing that the Surge team is just very hit or miss on a week to week basis. It's just scary, right? Like I don't know. I just feel like Seattle right now, you're taking them at their highest point that they might be all season, right? -650 to like not a horrible team in LA Gorillas. It just feels so steep, but at the same time, like LA Gorillas on the other side of that plus 360, it's juicy, but again, just not a ton of confidence considering that their wins this past weekend weren't super significant, right? Easy opponents. They took care of business. That was great to see that they hung in till the end after going 0-3 in their first three. But yeah, this is a really tough one to call. I might just stay away from it completely. I kind of just want every data point I can get on Seattle in Search and Destroy. We'll get another good one here for them against a quality Search and Destroy opponent after, having beaten like Minnesota and some other not so great teams in that game mode. So, yeah, this is just a watch and learn kind of a game for me. But yeah, as someone who likes phase in the tournament, I'll definitely be cheering for LA Gorillas to win this.
Yeah, I mean, the thing of it is, I've actually already put some of the spread bets in for Seattle, but the problem is though, in like, um, the problem is that I worry that because I think I already bet the -42.5 map one for Seattle, which I think there's value on that. But at the same point in time, like, would it surprise me if LEG wins like 250 to 200? No, right? Like at that point, I should be like, you knew, right? You knew it was coming. Like you knew something was going to happen with Seattle. It's like they cannot keep up that pace the entire time. Right now, maybe they figured it out, but I don't know if they have. So we'll we'll see. This is going to be an interesting one. I'm not breaking the bank on this one, but I am putting some bets down on it. So we'll have to see as we get there. Third match of the weekend here. Actually, I'm sorry, of Thursday here. Boston versus Optic. Boston +1.5 -200. Optic -1.5 +150. Boston +125 on the money line. Optic -165. over 4.5 plus 160, under 4.5 minus 210. So I actually really like Optic here. My model probably is a bit too high on Optic, giving Optic a 70% chance to win this game. Um, but like, I don't know how good Boston is. I mean, they beat Thieves, but my model doesn't particularly like Thieves either, right? So, like, I've got Boston as a better hardpoint team, but I've got Optic as a far better search team. And then I got Boston is slightly favored in the control, but very, very close in the control. But no, like I actually don't mind Optic in this at all. I think Optic is figuring out hardpoint, and they're actually pretty good at it. They could have definitely beaten subliners in hardpoint, but they just kind of didn't. And I think that is ultimately the problem. But I think once they figure it out, I think they're going to be a very, very tough team to deal with. But yeah, I'm on Optic in this game. Sprinkle a little at -1.5, maybe some money line here, maybe some spreads. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I lean Boston here, which makes some sense considering I like them in the futures market. But yeah, it's tough to say. Again, another team that has gone through actually two teams that have gone through team changes lately, and both with good results. Right, Optic 3-2 in the qualifier stage, Boston 4-1. You look at the schedules they faced. It makes sense they would have those records, right? Optic went through a gauntlet. They played LA Gorillas, won. That was a close series overall, but the first one they had with Ghosty, if I'm not mistaken, they got the win against the LA Gorillas team that ended up making winners bracket. So, you know, it took them 5 games, but they got it done. Then they get swept by Toronto in a match that wasn't even close. That was a little concerning. Since then, though, it's been, I would say, impressive, right? They go play Minnesota, a team who is horrible right now, but they sweep them easily. No map was close, really. Then they go play Subliners. They get swept. However, 2 of those maps were really close. The hard point was not a blowout. They competed at least in that sweep. You don't like to see a sweep, but it's to a quality opponent. And then they go out and they beat FaZe in what was a pretty big upset to end the weekend. Um, only losing the search and destroy to them, which everybody does. But the fact that they won the control, very impressive. And yeah, they won both hard points. That's kind of the formula to beat FaZe, I feel like, is you're either going to have to win both hard points or somehow take a search from them. But I feel like just winning both hard points is probably easier. And that's exactly what they did. They look great. So yeah, a Texas team that's been improving as the stage has gone on, and a Boston team that was pretty close to a 5-0 in the qualifier stage. They slipped up against Mutineers in their fourth match, but outside of that, a win against Toronto, a win against London, a win against LA Gorillas, and they ended it with a nice win over LA Thieves in a game 5. Yeah, a couple really quality wins in there. Obviously taking out London and LA Gorillas, who each had 2 wins in the stage. Like, those are solid wins too. The Mutineers loss is ugly, but I think these other 4 wins make up for that. And yeah, I don't know. Again, a really, really close game in my opinion. It feels to me a lot like Toronto and New York, just with slightly, lesser teams. In that case, I'm just gonna kind of side with that plus money. And in this case, it's Boston. Obviously, you kind of have to factor in the home crowd is going to be behind Optic. Does that hurt Boston? I think it probably does a little bit. But yeah, I like Boston here. I'd rather take them plus 125 than minus 200 to cover a map and a half. So I lean Boston here. I totally get if you like Optic, though. Steady improvement from them. They're at home, no travel or anything. They're there. And yeah, we'll see how Ghosty does on his first LAN in front of a huge crowd, in front of the green wall. Um, I think it's better for the league when Optic's winning. So it's tough to say who I'll be rooting for if I have a vested interest in Boston here, but obviously a nice long Optic run this weekend would be good for the CDL as a whole. I don't know. I mean, it feels like a lot of these games we could go either way for, but I'll lean ever so slightly with the Boston breach in this one.
Yeah, The model does have a bias towards teams that are really, really good in SND. So I think that's why it's so curtailed towards Optic. But I mean, the thing of it is, this Optics team does seem to have kind of figured out in Boston is there's still some question marks on Boston. I don't completely trust Boston. I don't think they have it all figured out. So, um, well, that's another. Again, a lot of these are going to be very interesting matchups. And again, speaking of interesting matchups, we have the final match of the day: FaZe versus Thieves. Now, this is a rematch of, well, a lot of games. This is a rematch of the first game of the major qualifiers, which Thieves won, which was a rematch of the finals of the last major, which FaZe won. So if we keep going back and forth, this is FaZe's due here, and FaZe is in fact a favorite, a pretty sizable one. FaZe minus 1.5 plus 140, Thieves plus 1.5 minus 185. FaZe minus 190 on the money line, Thieves plus 145, over 4.5 plus 160, under 4.5 minus 210. So the thing of it is, my model actually really does like FaZe here. The model does not like Thieves, and I mean, it's weird because my model did like Thieves against Boston, but I think my model doesn't think much of Boston, which is kind of why I think it's now kind of doomed Thieves a little bit. My model actually has some value on that minus 1.5. It's kind of eyeing that as pretty juicy there. But the question though is, can FaZe win hardpoint? Right, like FaZe really struggled. Now it was actually really funny. I hit an amazing win on Sunday because before the game, like early a couple of days earlier, I had bet FaZe plus 10.5 on in the hard point. And then I also on the day of I bet Optic plus 10.5, and I'm like, because my model favored FaZe before, but then after weirdly after Sunday's game or after Saturday's games, it favored Optic in the hard points. So like, okay, let's double down. But I had actually kind of forgotten I had bet FaZe plus 10.5. But I'm like, you know what? It's fine. I can hit an amazing middle here, right? Because if one team wins 250 to 240 or something like that, then it doesn't matter. I win both bets, and sure enough, it was looking terrifying at first. I was like, oh god. But to be fair, I did bet more on Optic plus 10.5, so I was okay. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm still plus like a zero point 0.8 of a unit or whatever. But like, it was terrifying. I was like, oh, this is. But then FaZe started coming back, and they kept coming back, and they coming back, and then finally they got over 240. I was like, oh my god, this was a beautiful play, beautiful win there. But no, and that actually speaks to the power of sometimes getting middles in these hardpoint games. You can do that. Those are valuable to look out for at times, especially in some of the closer ones. But no, I think FaZe is okay at hardpoint. I don't think they're great at hardpoint, but I think they're okay. I just don't, and Thieves is good too, but also not great. So I don't know. I don't know what we're doing with these, but I think FaZe is really really good at SND, and I think that is the thing they are the best at. And I think when you look at this, like I've got FaZe winning the SND 6-2, and then I've got them winning the control barely, right? I think it's time for FaZe to show, hey, guess what? We're the best, one of the best teams in the game. We are just better than the Thieves, and we're just going to show that on the field here. What are your thoughts on this game?
With you on this one for the most part. I also see some value in FaZe, and actually the price did drop. Last I checked it earlier today, FaZe was at minus 200 on the money line, and their minus 1.5 was a little worse. So yeah, maybe some proof that people like Thieves in this match, considering the prices, makes some sense. And I when you look at that futures market, it really does jump out, right? Thieves is the sixth highest favorite. They're 7-1. They just made it to a grand final. They lost to FaZe, but they just rebounded and they beat FaZe in a pretty convincing fashion in this qualifier stage. They just seem to be that team that can go toe to toe with FaZe. I don't know if it's just because we've seen this matchup a lot or like yeah, I mean they're a good team, so they will get wins off of FaZe. Like somebody has to. So it should be a juicy, juicy matchup. Yeah, I like FaZe. The minus 190 is a little steep, but again, FaZe value I think is more so in the futures market than in this specific game. Because with FaZe, I think their biggest argument that you make for them winning the entire event, going back to back, is this game against Thieves is maybe their toughest match of the weekend that they'll have. if they get past this, right, they'll get a Seattle team that we know has inconsistencies, that is coming off of a relatively easy match versus LA Gorillas, or you get LA Gorillas in round two. That's nice. Again, you have New York, Toronto, Optic, and Boston on the bottom side of the bracket. Should you make the winners final, I have FaZe as comfortable favorites over all of those teams. And again, just the longer you have to wait on quality opponents, the better. So we'll see who they get paired up with should they make it that far. But yeah, I do like FaZe here. I tend to think that like in this kind of a matchup, you're always not always, but you're often going to get value on the team that lost last time they played. And in this case, it was FaZe. So yeah, I like FaZe here. I think I'll avoid the specific game, like this specific game. Maybe a map spread could be interesting. Yeah, FaZe's hard point pick is kind of an interesting debate here as well. Last time these teams played, they played on Hydro and Mercado. Hydro's been really bad for FaZe, but they might have to keep playing it. Embassy is really their bread and butter, but Thieves not great at that, so that's an easy veto for them. I feel like I don't know if you're FaZe at this point. I know Mercado is one of the maps that you have a above 500 record on, but like Thieves are just so good at that map that I think like Thieves should veto Embassy clearly. FaZe should veto Mercado. Now that means you're gonna have to play two hard point maps, both on maps that you've struggled on through, or yeah, any of the three would be difficult. But like, if it's a hotel, like that's a map, or yeah, Thieves 8-7 on the year. Atlanta 4-7, but the record is a little worse than what I think they should be on that. Fortress, they don't play a ton. Thieves don't play it a lot, so that could actually be an interesting map that makes it through. So yeah, if you're FaZe, I think you can maybe get a little interesting with the map vetoes here. Bounce back and control, it's been not great for them lately, but I would just keep vetoing Fortress. You're good enough on Hotel and on El Asilo that you should continue to get wins. And yeah, the search and destroy is just ridiculous for FaZe. So we're pro FaZe, it sounds like, on this podcast. Hopefully they don't let us down, but we'll see if they can make it through this banger of a matchup because it is going to be a fun one.
Yes, it will be. Now, last but not least, before we go, of the four losers bracket teams, so Las Vegas, Minnesota, London, and Florida, which of these teams do you give the best chance to winning their match, their winners bracket match, or their first
Yeah,
match?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me pull up the bracket quick. So Vegas had the 9 seed, so they just missed out. I do have Vegas as the best, just in terms of sheer power rankings of those bottom four. Yeah, should they play LA Gorillas, I would have Vegas as a slight favorite. So I do like Vegas, maybe to go on a little bit of a run. The hard part comes in the next game, which would likely be FaZe or Thieves. Whoever loses that is probably going to beat Rocker. I have really no faith in Rocker. They've lost their last 7. They're going to play a really good team in losers round 1. So an early exit for them. I think they'll probably have their 8th loss in a row, which is hard to say, but it is the case. Yeah, London, you made a little bit of a case for earlier. They could make some sense. Um, it's tough, right? Because they had a really quality win versus Toronto. And then before that, they beat LA Gorillas, lost to Boston, who could be a team that drops down to them. Um, it was actually closer than it seemed, though, that opening match of the qualifiers. That was Beans' first match. He was very shaky. Since then, Beans has been much better. So, um, yeah, that could be one though where, maybe London bounce back and win. Or if they played Optic, again, you got the whole crowd not behind you, which would be tough. And this Optic team is very hit or miss. So that could make some sense if London could get a win there. And then Florida, I don't really have any faith in. They won one match this weekend. It was against Boston. A, a pretty quality win, but otherwise you have losses against FaZe, New York, Seattle, and LA Gorillas. Again, a pretty tough schedule, albeit, but yeah, they're going to have to play Toronto or New York. We already saw their match against New York, it wasn't close. And Toronto, I fear, would be much the same. So, really, no faith in Minnesota or Florida. Pretty confident Vegas can win, especially if it's against LA Gorillas, and I wouldn't even count them out against Seattle. And then London could maybe be like a surprise losers bracket team that ends up with a win, even though I would have them as not huge underdogs to Boston or Optic, but like clear underdogs to either of those two.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I kind of agree with that assessment. My model randomly has London having a close matchup against Boston if Boston were to lose to Optic. Um, and it actually has Florida putting up a decent fight against Toronto and New York. So
Wow. Oh, all
I
right. Maybe it's because you love Fellow so much. I don't know.
I mean weirdly it does. The model act like especially when you look at the kill projection model, like it's always like over on fellow, over, and I'm like, you do this and he scrapes out an over, but he's like, oh, I got 45 kills. Like, well, that wasn't what you were expected to have. But this is the thing. It's like, well, you still cash the over, so that's fine. But like, it's the model does really like fellow. I don't know why. I don't think he's particular. But like again, like there's something to be said for okay, these teams like I don't think New York is that good, and I think the model is right now overreacting to Toronto losing to London. But I think once that levels out, I think this picture is gonna be a lot more clear. And I think while we're not there yet, I think we're probably getting there very soon. So we'll have to see. I suspect Toronto will probably beat New York, and then I think there might be some value on Florida, especially if you get something like if it's something stupid like New York minus 2.5, like plus, like if you get like Florida plus 1.5 at like plus 150, which is probably what you'd get, then like there's value on that. And like you'll probably have
Yeah.
something insane where it's like, oh, like New York minus 40 or something in the hard point or something, and then you're gonna be like, well, that's value there. Or like or something like Florida plus 1.5. Like you'll get good value on Florida beating either New York or Toronto. I just think they're much more likely to beat New York than they are to beat Toronto. But and the mall's just overreacting for the Toronto loss to London. But we'll have to see. Anything else we want to mention here before we leave it for this weekend? And we'll be back in well, actually closer to 3 weeks now. But we'll be back before Major Four qualifiers. Anything else we want to share about this weekend's worth of games?
Just one last shout out on the MVP market now that I've had a little more time to look at it. I mentioned the Atlanta guys. I like Celium and Abizi. Awakening at 20 to 1 makes some sense if you think Boston can go on a crazy run and win the whole thing. One other thing, again, I know you're out on New York for the most part. As someone who kind of likes them, Skies is 33 to 1. Much like LA Thieves, New York are a team where it's kind of whenever they win, it seems like it's because of somebody different every time. And yeah, Skies has a pretty big number for a team that is good, and yeah, a player that has as much pop off potential as Priesta and Kismet, in my opinion. So to get him at 33 to 1 is, I think, a pretty good price. But other than that, nothing. I'm ready for it. I'm excited to watch. It should be a heck of a weekend of COD.
Yes, I agree. And we will see you back here in 3 weeks to talk about the Major Four qualifiers and moving on from that. Until then, honestly, major weekends are probably, I'd actually say they're probably one of the best weekends in sports. So, in all of esports, basically, you have so many matches, so many great games going on. 100%, um, I think every time there's a major, it's always a good weekend. So enjoy this beautiful weekend of COD, and we'll see you in a couple weeks, guys. See ya.